The second important section of a research proposal is the background section. This acts as a general map on which you will locate your study. The background section of a research proposal provides the context for your study. It contextualizes your research. It sets the scene, the general scene. It's like a map. It helps you to later demonstrate how you identify the research problem. An important feature of scientific research is that it is cumulative, in the sense that it builds up an edifice of knowledge. Each new piece of research adds to previous research, but this interconnectedness cannot be shown unless you write a good background section. Sometimes this is called an introduction, as it introduces the whole paper. It tells the reader about many things, like the discipline, the area, the field, and then the topic. Of course, these shouldn't appear in this order, but at least there is some kind of narrowing. The background section sets the scene. The background section makes a strong first impression on readers. Since it is the opening section, it has a crucial role in making this impression. When writing this section, think of it as a way to paint a picture of the current state of knowledge in your field, often by describing an ideal situation, to show how things should be. This is in general. Now let's be specific. Firstly, in the background section, start broad and then narrow the focus. Begin with a broad perspective of the main subject area to grab the reader's attention. This is your hook. From there, you progressively narrow the focus to your specific research topic. Here you can use historical facts or concepts or current trends or established theories to guide the whole process. Of course, it depends on the topic and the type of problem you are going to introduce later. When writing the background section, it is important to provide substantiating references. You must include references to support your discussion. Some say that references can't appear here, but at a certain point of the discussion, even if you have written some broad statements at the beginning, the first 3 to 4 sentences at the beginning, without referring to a particular source, but at a certain point you will arrive at the stage where you have to rely on what the others have said on existing theories, and this does not come from scratch. Therefore, it is important to supply the references. This shows that your project is grounded in existing theory, and this helps you to achieve cumulation. It's not, in fact, an isolated idea. Also, it demonstrates that your work belongs somewhere on the map of current scholarly knowledge. This means that the claims that you raise at the very beginning of your discussion should be supported. Another tip that we sometimes use in writing the background section, especially when the topic is not familiar or technical, is to define the key terms. Sometimes we have a key term without which the reader cannot understand your discussion. So, if necessary, provide clear definitions of any technical terms or jargon that your reader might not be familiar with. This ensures that your argument is easy to follow from the very beginning. For example, suppose that you will conduct a study on the phenomenon of scaffolding. The term scaffolding itself might not be a familiar word to many people, especially those who are not specialists in education or pedagogy. If you continue speaking about scaffolding without providing a minimal definition for the sake of clarity, readers will not be able to follow the argument altogether, and they cannot understand the significance of the problem and the whole study. In brief, the background section involves the technique of narrowing, starting from broad statements that captivate the reader's attention and ending with the topic itself. In addition to that, you have to include any backing theory. You have to be clear enough by providing definitions without forgetting to supply the necessary references where needed. But sometimes writers fall into some traps and make some mistakes. These mistakes can hinder the understanding of your point. They can cause confusion on the part of the reader, and they may not necessarily lead you to present the problem. First, avoid being overly long-winded. Here, sometimes writers turn around the bush and they take a long way to reach the topic. On this basis, you are advised not to take a long time to get to your topic. Between the beginning of the background section and the end, there shouldn't be a long way. Be reasonable and go to the point efficiently, providing only the necessary information. Avoid assuming that the most basic concepts of the subject need to be explained in a great detail. Your readers likely have some foundational knowledge. They know something already about the topic. Secondly, don't use too much jargon. We mean by jargon technical terms, especially in the opening sentences, because this can confuse and lead the reader to not to be interested in continuing reading. So this will alienate your reader from the start. Only introduce the complex language just gradually as you narrow your focus. Finally, remember that writing the background section is only a way to reach the third section, which is the statement of the problem. So there should be some coherence between this section and the third section. On the basis of this, you're advised not to omit the problem. That is to say, you should hint at the problem in a way to prepare for the discussion of the problem. The background should be or should logically prepare for introducing the research problem in the following section. A common mistake is to describe the context as detached from what follows. Let's take an illustration. The topic of this study is investigating the factors of middle school pupils dropout in Algeria. Here's the illustration. Of course, the text can be longer than that, but just to exemplify the different parts and the process of narrowing, the process of defining the necessary words, and how we at the end reach the topic and we hint at the problem. The text reads, in an increasingly interconnected and knowledge-based global economy, high-quality education is no longer a luxury, but a fundamental necessity for individual and national development. Education equips people with the critical skills needed to compete in the job market, innovate, and contribute to civic life. You see here broad statements. Recognizing this, countries worldwide have committed to providing universal and compulsory basic education for their citizens. So moving from talking about education, now basic education. This global effort, championed by organizations like the United Nations, aims to ensure every child completes their foundational schooling, setting the stage for a productive and successful adulthood. UNESCO 2023. You see here that the topic of dropout, school dropout, is not yet mentioned, but something broader in scope is being presented. However, despite significant advancements in school enrollment rates across the globe, school dropout, defined as the failure to complete a basic level of schooling, remains a persistent and complex challenge. We see here a clear shift from broad statements to a more limited aspect of education or phenomenon within education, which is school dropout. You notice also that the author provides a brief definition in case the reader is not familiar with the term itself, then continues the discussion. This phenomenon has been a prominent topic in the fields of education and development. You see the context. In the fields of education and development. This is a kind of contextualization of the topic, linking the topic to areas of research. We continue. Over the last 2 decades, as it serves as a significant barrier to achieving national educational goals and hinders social mobility. You notice that the writer provides references for their claims because these are not their own claims. For example, a recent study on educational trends in the MENA region found that despite high enrollment in primary schools, a considerable number of students leave the educational system prematurely. UNICEF 2022. Here you see that the writer comes to the point where he hints at the problem. In Algeria, this phrase here is very important. It shows the context or the setting. While educational policy and public investment have led to near universal primary and secondary school enrollment, a concerning trend has emerged, particularly at the middle school level. According to a report by the Algerian Ministry of National Education, the dropout rate among pupils aged 12 to 15 has been steadily increasing over the past 5 years. Ministry of Education 2021. This phenomenon, which undermines the state's educational objectives and limits the future potential of a significant portion of the youth population, has received limited research attention, and then providing the reference. Notice that at the very end, the writer comes to talk about the context where the study will, or the context in which the phenomenon is observed, and highlighting the contrast between the situation that was presented at the very beginning as an ideal situation, talking about education and its importance in the world for the individual, socially, politically, and concerning the whole life. Now, this contrasts significantly with what comes at the end. You notice clearly that there is a gradual narrowing from very broad statements to a narrowed topic. You have noticed that this text grows logically, beginning with a discussion or a brief introduction or a few sentences on the necessity of education in a globalized world. And this will enhance or will show the reader that the study itself is important for this general framework, general social framework, by highlighting the benefits of education. Later, the writer moves to highlight the efforts made by countries to secure education for everyone. And then the topic, which is school dropout, is introduced, the phenomenon, which is the core of the study, and a definition is provided, and the importance of the phenomenon researching this phenomenon also is highlighted. Finally, the scope is limited to the Algerian context. And through this gradual movement, we see clearly that there is an argument that is being developed. The writer is in a way trying to convince the reader of the importance of the subject, and at the same time the writer is trying to inform the reader about how the phenomenon itself is related to some research somewhere in the field of education and development. Overall, this is a good way to start. This text is well structured. It starts broad and goes narrow. It uses credible sources to ground the statements and the claims. It paints the picture of ideal situation versus real picture very effectively. It highlights the significance of the problem itself or the topic itself. And most importantly, it makes or creates a strong first impression by showing that the study is timely, it is relevant because it is related to education, which is needed, and necessary. Structured in this way, it will be possible and easy for the writer to move to the third section and present the research problem, to the statement of the problem.